My name's Layla Lane, 27 years old, and at 2 a.m., my own mother gripped my arm, dragged me to the porch, and screamed, "Get out and never come back." Her voice echoed through the dark Madison street. I begged barefoot, shivering in my thin pajamas, my heart pounding as her new husband stood on the stairs, smirking like he'd won some twisted game. "You disobeyed us," she spat, accusing me of defying their rules about my dad's company. I pleaded, tears streaming, but she slammed the door in my face, the lock clicking like a gunshot. I stumbled into the rain alone with nothing but my phone and the sting of betrayal, all because I wouldn't bend to their demands over the legacy my dad built. I'd always sensed her resentment, the way she'd sidelined me since he passed. But this was a new low. I wasn't just kicked out of the house. I was erased from my own family. Standing there soaked, I swore I'd uncover why they were so desperate to push me out. 1 week later, my phone buzzed non-stop. They called 30 times in a single hour, begging me to talk. What changed? I'd found something they never wanted me to see. Have you ever had to fight for what's rightfully yours? Drop your story in the comments. Hit that subscribe button and join me to see how I turned their betrayal into my triumph. Rain soaked through my pajamas as I stumbled down the driveway. My mother's words cut through the night sharp and final. "You're done here." Her grip on my arm left, a dull throb, her nails biting into my skin as she dragged me out. Thomas Grant, my mother's new husband, stood at the top of the stairs, arms crossed, his smirk, cold and triumphant, like he'd orchestrated the whole scene. I'd begged, my voice breaking, but the door slammed shut, the sound ringing in the dark Madison night. Barefoot I stood, frozen rain mixing with tears, as the reality sank in. I had nowhere to go. My phone, barely charged, was my only lifeline. It trudged through the wet streets, the cold stinging my feet, until I reached a bus-stop shelter a few blocks away. The plastic bench was slick, uncomfortable, but it was all I had. I curled up, trying to stop, trembling my mind, replaying the fight. This wasn't just about disobeying. Mom had been pushing me out for years, ever since Dad died. I was 22 when Charles Lane, the man who built Lane Properties, passed from a heart attack. His company was his legacy meant for me, but Mom had other plans. She'd started subtly replacing Dad's favorite armchair in the office with one Thomas, picked swapping out family photo in the living room for ones of her and Thomas. Where I was nowhere to be seen, I'd thought it was her way of moving on. But tonight showed it was calculated. Sitting in the shelter, I remembered the first clue. 2 years ago, Mum hosted a family dinner. I arrived to find my usual seat at the dining table gone replaced by a flimsy folding chair in the corner. "We're reorganizing," she'd said, her voice tight while Thomas nodded, his eyes glinting with something I couldn't place. I'd let it slide, but it kept happening. My name vanished from company emails. Board meetings happened behind my back, even though Dad's will named me a key shareholder. Mom's excuses were always vague. "It's just business." But Thomas's smug glances told me they were planning something bigger. I pulled out my phone, the screen demand flickering. A notification from Mom's social media flashed a post about Lane Properties' new vision. My name was absent. Instead, it praised Thomas's leadership. My chest tightened. This wasn't just about kicking me out of the house. It was about stealing everything Dad had built. I thought back to Amendment with Dad when I was 18 in his office. "Layla," he'd said, his voice firm, "this company is your future. Noon can take that from you." But Mom and Thomas were trying. His smirk tonight was proof they thought they'd already won. The rain eased, but my determination grew. I wasn't just a kid they could shove aside. I'd grown up shadowing Dad, learning every contract, every client. I knew Lane Properties better than anyone. If Mom and Thomas thought they could erase me, they were mistaken. I scrolled through my phone, searching for someone to reach out to. Most contacts were family or company staff loyal to Mom, but one name stood out from college. He might know something. I sent a quick message, my fingers shaking, asking to meet. As I pressed send, a car's headlights swept past, briefly lighting the shelter. I wasn't sure what I'd uncover, but I knew I wouldn't let Mom and Thomas take what was mine. Hours dragged on in that shelter, my thoughts racing. I recalled another moment last year when Mom called at a meeting to restructure Lane Properties. She'd pushed for Thomas to join the board, claiming it was Tumadernai's. I'd challenged it, citing Dad's will and my voting rights. Her face had hardened, and she'd snapped, "You're too young to understand." Thomas had leaned back, that same smirk playing on his lips, like he was already counting the profits. Now it was clear they'd been plotting for years, waiting for the right moment to cut me out entirely. By dawn, my phone buzzed with a reply from Dad's friend. He agreed to meet soon, saying he had something important to share. I leaned back against the shelter's wall, exhausted, but resolute. Mom and Thomas thought they'd broken me, left me with nothing. But I was Charles Lane's daughter, and I'd fight for his legacy. They'd underestimated me, and they'd pay for it. By 8 a.m., I dragged myself into a coffee shop on State Street, my phone barely holding a charge. The place was quiet, just a few early risers sipping coffee at wooden tables. I found an outlet near the counter, plugged in my phone, and ordered a black coffee, my hands still trembling from the cold night. As their screen flickered to life, I opened my social media, desperate for a distraction. That's when I saw it. A new post from Judith Lane's account. My mother, bold and public, announcing Lane Properties' new era. My heart sank. The post declared, I was no longer part of the company, replaced by a streamlined leadership team. There was a photo Judith and Thomas, standing in the boardroom, surrounded by distant relatives, all smiling like they just won a prize. My face was nowhere in it. I scrolled through the comments, each one a knife twist. "Congrats on the fresh start," one said. Another praised Thomas's bold vision. Not a single mention of me, the daughter of the man who built Lane Properties. I gripped my coffee cup, the heat burning my palms. Judith wasn't just cutting me out of the house. She was erasing me from Dad's legacy, from the company I'd helped run since I was a teenager. I remembered Dad teaching me to read contracts at 16, his steady voice explaining every clause. "This is yours one day," he'd said. Now Judith and Thomas were rewriting history, and the world was clapping. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. A message from my cousin Holly Quinn popped up. Family meeting at the Ivory Room on East Washington at noon. "You should come." I stared at the words, my gut twisting. Holly and I weren't close. She was younger, always caught up in her own world, but she'd never been cruel. Still, the timing felt off. Why invite me now? Hours after Judith's post. Was this her idea, or was Judith pulling their strings? I typed a quick reply, agreeing to go, though every instinct screamed it was a trap. I couldn't shake the image of Thomas's smirk from last night. The way he'd watched me beg, like it was entertainment. This meeting had to be part of their plan. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the coffee shop ceiling. The post wasn't just about the company. It was a public humiliation. Judith had painted me as irrelevant, a nobody in the family I'd been born into. I thought of Dad's will, the one I'd read after his death. It named me as a primary shareholder with clear instructions to keep Lane Properties in my hands. Judith had brushed it off back then, saying it was outdated. Now I saw it for what it was. She'd been planning this for years with Thomas as her accomplice. The photo in her post with relatives I barely knew proved they were closing ranks against me. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness matching my mood. I wasn't just fighting for the company anymore. This was about my name, my place in the family Dad had built. Judith and Thomas thought they could erase me, but I'd grown up in boardrooms, learning every deal. every trick. I wasn't the naive kid they assumed. I checked my phone again, rereading Holly's message. The Ivory Room was upscale a place for showy family gatherings. If Judith wanted to parade her new era, I'd show up not to beg, but to watch, to listen, to find out what they were hiding. I'd spent years trusting Judith, believing her lies about family first. No more. Dad's voice echoed in my head. No one can take your future. I'd prove him right. At noon, I stepped into the restaurant on East Washington Avenue, still in yesterday's clothes. The Ivory Room buzzed with chatter tables filled with relatives I barely recognized. Judith stood at the head of a long table, her posture stiff, her eyes scanning the room like a queen holding court. Thomas sat beside her, his face blank, leaning back in High's chair as if he owned the place. Holly caught my eye from across the table, giving a small nod, but her expression was guarded. I slid into an empty seat, my stomach churning. The air felt thick, every glance from the family loaded with judgment. Judith wasted no time. Meredith, she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. We're here to discuss your actions. She paused, letting the words hang, then accused me of stealing company documents from Lane Properties. You've been sneaking around taking what doesn't belong to you, she said, her tone dripping with scorn. Gasps rippled through the table. I opened my mouth to protest, but she cut me off, holding up a hand. We trusted you, and you betrayed us. Her words were rehearsed, each one a calculated jab to paint me as the villain. I glanced at Thomas, expecting him to chime in, but he just sat there, his eyes fixed on the tablecloth. Hissilence louder than any accusation. I clenched my fists under the table, my face burning, stealing. I'd spent years working for Dad, filing contracts, meeting clients. Those documents were as much mine as anyone's. Judith's lie was bold, meant to humiliate me in front of cousins, aunts, and uncles I hadn't seen in years. I scanned their faces. Some looked shocked. Others nodded along, already sold on her story. Holly stayed quiet, her eyes on her plate, avoiding mine. This wasn't a family meeting. It was a setup, a public execution to justify cutting me out of Lane Properties for good. I stood my chair, scraping against the floor. You're lying, I said, my voice steady, despite the shaking in my legs. Judith's eyes narrowed, but she didn't flinch. Sit down, Layla. You're embarrassing yourself, she snapped. I didn't move. I remembered Dad's words from years ago, when we'd sat in his office late one night. Sincerity is the one thing no one can take from you. He'd set his hand on my shoulder. Charles Lane had built his company on that principle, and I wasn't about to let Judith twist it into a lie. She and Thomas were playing a game, but I wasn't their pawn. I turned, to leave the weight of every stare pressing into my back. Thomas finally looked up, his expression still blank, like he was above it all. That indifference stung worse than Judith's words. As I pushed through the restaurant's glass doors, the cool air hit my face, clearing my thoughts. This meeting wasn't about truth. It was about control. Judith wanted to erase me from the company and the family, and Thomas was her silent partner, letting her do the dirty work. But I wasn't done. Dad had taught me how to read people, how to spot a bluff. They thought they'd cornered me, but they'd only lit a fire. Walking down East Washington Avenue, I felt a shift inside me. I wasn't just fighting for Lane Properties anymore. I was fighting for Dad's memory, for everything he'd stood for. Judith's accusation was a desperate move proof. She was scared of what I might find. I pulled out my phone, rereading the message from Dad's old friend. He'd promised to meet soon, said he had something that could help. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing. It needed evidence, something solid to expose Judith and Thomas for what they were. 2 days later, an email popped up from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "About Charles." My pulse quickened as I opened it, sitting on a friend's couch where I'd been crashing since the night Judith kicked me out. The message was short from my dad's old friend, George Ellis, asking to meet at a coffee shop on Willie Street tomorrow morning. He wrote, "I have something you need to see." Before I could reply, my phone rang George's number. His voice was gruff but kind, just like I remembered from Dad's old company picnics. "Meredith, it's about Lane Properties," he said. "Can you make it?" I agreed, my mind racing with possibilities. The next morning, I walked into the coffee shop, my stomach knotted with nerves. George was already there, seated in a corner booth, a thick envelope on the table. He stood his handshake firm, his eyes carrying the weight of years. "I was your dad's best friend at W. Madison," he said, sliding the envelope toward me. "Charles would have wanted you to have these." Inside were original documents, Lane Properties, shareholder agreements stamped and notarized, listing me as the primary heir to Dad's shares. My breath caught. The papers showed Judith and Thomas had forged a transfer agreement routing my shares to Thomas's name. "I found these in Charles's old safe," George said. "He trusted me to keep them secure." I stared at the signatures, my dad's bold handwriting unmistakable. This was proof, hard, undeniable proof, that Judith and Thomas were stealing what Dad had built for me. George leaned forward, his voice low. "They've been planning this since Charles passed." I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I thanked him, my hands trembling, as I tucked the envelope into my bag. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. Dad's legacy wasn't lost, not yet. I left the coffee shop and called my old friend from college, Sylvia Ross, a lawyer who'd always had my back. I explained everything, the documents, Judith's accusations at the family meeting, Thomas's silent complicity. Sylvia's voice was calm but sharp over the phone. "Send me scans of those papers," she said. I found a print shop nearby, scanned the documents, and emailed them to her. Within hours, Sylvia called back. "These are airtight," she said. "Their notarization and dates check out. Judith and Thomas don't have a leg toaster non-legally." She paused, then added, "But we need more. If they're forging documents, there's likely A-trail emails, bank records something. Keep digging." I paced the sidewalk outside the print shop, Sylvia's words sinking in. The documents were a start, but it needed to be thorough. Judith and Thomas had been careful covering their tracks for years. I thought back to Dad's office, the way he'd kept everything organized, files, backups, even older mails. If there was more evidence, it'd be there, hidden in plain sight. Sylvia agreed to start drafting a legal strategy, but she warned me to move fast. "They'll escalate once they know you're fighting back," she said. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I wasn't just fighting for Lane Properties. I was fighting for Dad, for everything he'd taught me. Sitting on a bench outside, I flipped through the documents again, my resolve hardening. George had risked a lot to get these to him, and Sylvia was ready to go to battle. I wasn't alone anymore. I remember Dad taking me to my first board meeting at 17, his pride, when I caught a mistake in a contract. "You've got a sharp mind, Layla," he'd said. Judith and Thomas thought they could outsmart me, but they didn't know the half of it. I sent Sylvia a text, asking her to check for any digital records tied to Lane Properties. Then I opened my phone's calendar, marking a plan to visit Dad's old office. Judith and Thomas had underestimated me, but I was just getting started. By Friday, I found an old email account of Dad's still active in my laptop. I'd been staying at our friend's place, combing through anything that might help my fight. The account, untouched for years, held a folder labeled for Layla. Inside was a single email from Charles sent a month before his heart attack. It read, "My shares in Lane Properties are yours. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Attached was a scanned letter, Heiss handwriting clear, detailing his intent to protect my stake in the company. My heart pounded. This wasn't just a note, it was a shield. I headed to Lane Properties' office in downtown Madison, the documents from George tucked in my bag. The building's glass doors gleam at a stark contrast to my frayed nerves. Judith was already there, seated behind Dad's old desk, her expression cold. "Meredith," she said, sliding a contract. "Cross the table, sign this. It transfers your shares to Thomas. It's what's best for the company." Her voice was smooth, like she'd rehearsed it. The contract looked official, but I knew better. It was another forgery, just like the one George had exposed. I leaned forward, meeting her gaze. "I found Dad's email," I said, my voice steady, "the one where he named me as his heir. You can't rewrite his wishes." Judith's face paled, her fingers steightening on the desk. For the first time, she looked rattled, her composure cracking. "You had no right to access that," she snapped, her voice rising. I didn't flinch. "It's my father's account. I have every right." The room felt electric, the air thick with her panic. Thomas stepped in from the doorway, his presence looming. "Enough," Layla, he said, his tone sharp but controlled. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." He moved to Judith's side, placing a hand on her shoulder. But his eyes were on me, calculating. He stood taller. "You forged documents to steal me shares," I said, pointing at the contract. "Dad's email proves it. You're not getting away with this." Thomas's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond, his silence betraying his unease. I grabbed my bag and turned to leave, my pulse racing, but my resolve unshaken. "Judith called after me. You'll regret this." Her voice was desperate now, a far cry from her usual control. I didn't look back, pushing through the office doors. I felt Dad's words from that email burning in my chest. Charles had known they'd try to take everything he'd left me the tools to fight back. I wasn't just his daughter. I was his legacy, and I wouldn't let them erase that. Outside, it pulled out my phone and emailed Sylvia, attaching scans of Dad's email and letter. "We've got them," I wrote. "Start the legal paperwork." Sylvia replied within minutes. "This is gold. I'll draft the lawsuit. Keep those documents safe." I leaned against a street lamp, the Madison skyline, blurring in my vision. Judith and Thomas thought they could bully me into submission, but they'd miscalculated. I'd grown up watching Dad negotiate deals, outsmart competitors. Now it was my turn. I wasn't just fighting for shares. I was fighting for the truth he'd entrusted to me. That evening, George sent me a video file through a secure link. I was still reeling from the confrontation at Lane Properties' office, my hands shaky, as I opened the email on my friend's couch. George's message was brief. "Found this in Charles's old files. Be careful." I clicked the link, and a grainy video loaded showing Judith and Thomas in Dad's office, unaware they were being recorded. Judith's voice was sharp. "Once Meredith's out, the shares are ours." Thomas nodded, adding, "She'll never see it coming." My blood ran cold. This was undeniable proof of their scheme to steal my inheritance. I called Sylvia, immediately, forwarding the video. "Can we use this legally?" I asked, my voice tight. Sylvia, calm as ever, said, "It's admissible if we can verify its authenticity. Send me everything: George's documents, Charles's email, the video." I spent the next hour uploading scans of the shareholder agreements and the email Dad had sent me, the one naming me his heir. Sylvia called back, her tone urgent. "The video's a gold mine," she said. Paired with the documents, it's enough to start a case. But we need to act fast. Public pressure could force their hand. I knew what she meant. Judith and Thomas thrived on their reputation in Madison's business circles. Exposing them could change everything. I opened my laptop, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Posting the truth online was a risk, but I couldn't let them rewrite Dad's legacy. I crafted a post for Lane Properties' key partners, attaching the video, Charles's email, and the original shareholder agreements. My caption was direct. This is the truth about Lane Properties. My father's wishes were clear. Judith Ann Thomas tried to erase them. I tagged major clients and local business groups, my heart pounding as I hit publish. Within minutes, notifications flooded my phone. Shares, comments, messages. The post was spreading like wildfire. By midnight, the video had thousands of views. Local business forums in Madison buzzed with shock. Lane Properties built in fraud. One comment read. Another from a longtime client said, "We trusted Judith. This changes everything." My phone buzzed with a text from Sylvia. "You've stirred a hornet's nest. Partners are pulling out." I scrolled through their actions, watching the empire Judith and Thomas had built begin to crack. A news outlet in Madison picked up Festry running a headline, "Scandal rocks Lane Properties leadership." I felt a rush of adrenaline. This wasn't just about me. It was about honoring Dad's vision. The next morning, Sylvia called with an update. 3 major partners have frozen their contracts, she said, and the bank just locked Lane Properties' main accounts pending an investigation. Judith and Thomas were unraveling. I pictured them scrambling, their carefully curated image shattering. Thomas's cold indifference at the family meeting. Judith's panicked outburst at the office. They had thought they were untouchable, but Dad had taught me to fight smart, to use the truth as a weapon. Charles's email, George's video, and those documents were my arsenal, and I deployed them perfectly. I leaned back, staring at my laptop screen. The comments kept pouring in, some calling for audits, others demanding Judith step down. I remembered Dad at a company dinner years ago raising a glass to high steam. "Trust is our currency," he'd said. Judith and Thomas had betrayed that, but I was taking it back. Sylvia texted, again saying she was finalizing the lawsuit, using the video and documents as evidence. "We've got them cornered," she wrote. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was winning, not just for me, but for the man who'd built Lane Properties from nothing. 1 month later, I stood in the Dean County Courthouse in Madison. The judge's gavel fell, a sharp sound that sealed my victory. Lane Properties was mine again, its control rightfully restored to me as Charles's heir. Judith and Thomas were ordered to pay $250,000 in damages for their fraud. Their names now toxic in Madison's business circles. Sylvia gripped my arm, her smile fierce. The courtroom hummed with murmurs, but I felt only calm resolve. Dad's company, his life's work, was secure. Judith sat across the room, her eyes hollow, while Thomas stared at the floor. I turned away, done with them. That evening, my phone lit up with Judith's number, 30 calls in 1 hour, each voicemail, a desperate plea. "Layla, please," she begged in one, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry, let's talk." I deleted every message without responding. She'd tried to erase me from Dad's legacy, and no apology could undo that. I blocked her numbers, severing our ties completely. There'd be no reconciliation, no second chances. Judith and Thomas faced more than financial ruin. Clients shunned them. Local papers ran exposés, and whispers of a criminal fraud investigation trailed them. They were outcasts, their influence gone, their lives unraveling in the city they had once dominated. The fallout was swift. Major partners cut ties with Judith and Thomas, and Lane Properties accounts, once frozen, were now under my control. I met with clients who'd seen my social media posts their trust in me. Rebuilding what Judith had tried to destroy, I was determined to lead the company with the honesty Dad had always valued. Proving his faith in me wasn't misplaced. A few weeks later, my boyfriend Ryan Miller took me to Tenney Park. The lake shimmered under the setting sun, and Heck knelt on the grass, holding a modest ring. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice steady. Tears stung my eyes as I nodded, overwhelmed by joy. We planned a quiet wedding in the same park, surrounded by those who'd stood by me through the fight. Sylvia handled the logistics, her sharp mind ensuring every detail was perfect. George attended his presence, a quiet nod to Dad's memory. On the wedding day, autumn leaves scattered across Tenny Park. The air cool and bright, my Aunt Kathleen Lane stood before our small gathering holding a handwritten poem. Her voice was warm as she read, weaving memories of Charles, his laughter, his stubborn belief in doing what's right. His heart beats in you, Layla, she said, her eyes meeting mine. You've carried his legacy forward. I held Ryan's hand, my chest tight with emotion. Kathleen's words brought Dad's presence into that moment as if he were standing among us. As Ryan and I exchanged vows, I thought of Dad's late night talks, his lessons about standing firm and staying true. He'd built Lane properties to last not just for profit, but for principle. Now, with his company back in my hands, and Ryan be my side, I felt a deep peace. Judith's betrayal, the months of doubt, they couldn't touch this moment. I'd fought for Dad's vision, and won not just in court, but in the life I was building. Under a tent after the ceremony, laughter filled the air. Sylvia raised a toast to resilience, her glass catching the light. I looked at Ryan, Kathleen, George, and the friends who'd become my true family. They weren't tied to me by blood, but by shared values, loyalty, truth, courage. Dad had always known this, and now I did too. Family isn't about blood, but the values you choose to protect. That was Charles's greatest gift to me, and I'd honor it every day in Lane properties and beyond.